Uh, Now, I think we would like to go to the next talk, which is something very, very crucial. And I think the retinal examination, especially for the peripheral degeneration, is of paramount importance in refractive surgery. And to take us through what are the current evidence of peripheral retinal degenerations, when to treat, when not, when to observe, which ones to treat, which ones to observe in the setting of refractive surgery. We have one of the senior most retina specialists that we have in our country, one of my teachers, the head of the Department of Retina subspecialty at the prestigious Shankar Netralaya, Dr. Pramod Bhende, sir. So over to you, sir, and thank you for accepting our invite.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vardhaman and AIOS for having me here. I think it's nice to have a last talk because I can see a few audience now. So, okay, coming back to peripheral degeneration and refractive surgery. So basically, what I look at it, probably I put in a different heads. What is the risk of detachment in myopia and why does it occur? Basically, why? Because most of the procedures are being done for myopia and very few for other refractive surgeries. What is the procedure that is planned? Does the risk change with the procedure what you chose? Which eyes would I treat? And what is the safe interval between laser and the procedure? That's extremely important for all of us. And what are the problems as a VR surgeon I would face in an eye having a detachment post-refractive surgery? We'll go one by one. So overall incidence of detachment in a myopic eyes, you will see somewhere 0.015 to 0.017, look at various literature. Yeah. But patient with a higher myopia having a much higher incidence of retinal detachment. And why is it so? Probably because you get an early vitreous liquefaction leading to early PVD in these high myop eyes. And also with increasing axial length, stretching of the eye wall, there is a higher incidence of peripheral retinal thinning and lattice degenerations. So there are different refractive techniques, what you have already discussed. A lot of things are there, you people know better than me. So, but when you look at, again, literature, there's a little bit controversies, but reported incidences in RD following refractive surgery is relatively higher. That's 0.04 to 0.33 as compared to 0.015. Now, interval, when you look at between procedure, refractive procedure and rheumatologist detachment, variable anything between 2 months to 10 years. And even cases with the bilateral retinal detachments post-LASIK have also been reported. A little bit biomechanical changes, what you see, I'm not going to go in every detail here. LASIK causes a sudden increase in intraocular pressure because of suction ring, which followed by a sudden decompression. Excimer laser sends a shock wave inside the eye. Film to LASIK, though you have lesser suction pressure, but probably it takes much longer time, so probably effect is same. And SMILE docking is done, but generally there are not much significant intraocular pressure changes in the eye. And refractive lens changes obviously is intraocular surgery risk, all of us know about it. And obviously most of this procedure, what will lead to eventually premature PVD and leading to, which is a precursor for retinal tears and ultimately leading to retinal detachments. So when you look at the second question now is you're having so many procedures. Does risk varies? So when you look at PRK, LASIK or SMILE, probably risk is more or less same as eyes without the procedures because most of these eyes are high myop. But probably it is relatively less with SMILE compared to other three procedures. Phakic, IOL and ICL, again, probably risk is more or less same in myopic eyes. But again, intraocular surgery risk is almost double to develop detachment when you look at a literature support. So recommendation for here as a VR surgeon, look at the type of refractive surgery being performed should not be a criteria to decide the prophylactic treatment for peripheral retinal degenerations. But retinal examination of myopic eyes undergoing refractive surgery, both before and after procedure, should be performed in every case. And prophylactic treatment of retinal degenerations, which can predispose to retinal tears or detachment, is advisable. Of course, there are few controversies as there. Detachment has been reported even after prophylactic treatment or in a patient with no peripheral lesions at all. So that's always a separate group is there. So what are these lesions you would like to treat? What are something called as, those are precursors of rheumatologist retinal detachment. The list is here. I'm not going to go again in detail, leave it for VR surgeons to handle. So basically what you would like to do is which eyes would I treat is basically all eyes with high risk. What we mean by high risk is high myopia, particularly having a family history of myopia or other retinal detachment or retinal lesions, or patient already having a retinal detachment in one eye and going for treatment for other eye, all symptomatic treatments, congenital disorders, typically what you see in a Stickler syndrome. And of course, eyes with extensive area, generally as a VR surgeon, we would like to observe, but that's a little bit gray zone. If you are doing any refractive procedure or intraocular procedure, we prefer to treat these eyes. So what is a safe interval? The next question is, what we look at literature again and evidence suggests that to retinal adhesions to have a little bit reasonably firm adhesion takes 2 to 3 weeks, though firm choroidal scar is firm up to 6 weeks. So anything more than probably 3 weeks probably reasonably safe period to go ahead with refractive surgery. Of course, again, PVD evolution takes almost 6 weeks. And so if you can wait for 6 weeks, probably that is better, because if something has to go wrong in between, you know that and you can treat it before taking the patient for your refractive surgery. But degenerative myopia, you do not know. It's absolutely unpredictable. And obviously, if there is pre-existing PVD, having other lesions, we do not have enough evidence which way it will go. This is just to show what you really actually look for is something like when you do a laser treatment, these are the pigmented scar, and that's the probably ideal way to wait for these scars when you take the patient for refractive surgery. Caution, as I said, we already told prophylactic barrage laser should be recommended to all retinal lesions before refractive surgery. But what we know is 5 to 14% of patients with the initial retinal breaks will develop additional breaks during long-term follow-up, even when a patient has had prior adequate treatment. So that adds on to all this patient needs additional examinations and extremely important pre-procedure counseling, particularly that informing them that things can still go wrong and they need a long-term follow-up, particularly if they are having a degenerative myopia. Now, just on a lighter note, but yes, these are practical issues when, as a VR surgeon, I deal with him. Pre-operatively, patient expectations are basically because he has gone to refractive surgery. And when you plan VR procedure, and if I put something scleral buccal or something like that, or refractive things are going to change, so we need to counsel them, or shall we not put, so shall I use or choose another procedure in these eyes? Intraoperatively, post-LASIK flap dislodgement, distortion in a post-RK patient, ICL cause a lot of distortion. All these issues can be visualization issue during vitrectomies. And post-operatively, again, induced myopia and astigmatism can be issue and headache for the refractive as well as VR person. Basically, that's a common question. And also, post-vitrectomy, they can have a cataract, astigmatism, and glaucoma. And obviously, another big question is, once we induce the astigmatism or refraction, myopia post-vitrectomy, is post-RD surgery refractive procedure is advised or not? Just, I think I leave that question open. I acknowledge to Dr. Muna and Dr. Sampurna, and thank you very much for patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Binde. That was a wonderful talk, and we did know some of these, but it just got strengthened that this is how it has to be. Thank you. Yes? Snail track?
Yeah, snail track probably precursor of what you would say, sometimes it causes problem, but most of the time it's like early stage, probably over a period, it may remain as it is, but generally they are fairly safe.
Fairly safe. Okay.
So as we discussed...
6 weeks becomes far too much to wait. You are sure to lose that patient.
Which one?
So, the laser barrage.
Yeah.
So, 3 weeks is also fair enough, right?
3 weeks is fair enough, I think.
Yeah.
And that is what standard generally we follow.
Generally
3 weeks should be more than enough, actually.
So 3 weeks, as you said, is enough for the laser refractive surgery. But what about like intraocular procedures such as phakic lenses, ICLs? Is 3 weeks enough, or you would like to wait more?
Any intraocular surgery, probably I would say what we know, inflammatory cascade, as we know anatomy, probably 6 to 8 weeks the time we need a scar strengthening. I would people wait for that. But taking for a surgery, because laser is done and after that you are taking for surgery, that does not change.
No.
But any additional procedure you want to do after doing your ICL or phakic IOL, then probably other procedure you would like to wait. But after laser you want to go ahead with 3 weeks, that's fine.
Okay, for the phakic lenses also.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are these non-mydriatic wide field imaging of the retina is a good alternative to a dilated fundus exam, or all patients should have?
we still...
Like the Optos, you have Optos.
Yeah, we have
as well.
Optos, but still sometimes few areas you're likely to miss, and particularly if pupil is not well dilated, still you're likely to miss periphery, and obviously it will be better like a indirect ophthalmoscopy with particularly scleral depression.
After all that was said by Pooja and me about corneal biomechanics, some of you who have Corbus, if the TBI is in the red or in the yellow, would you consider these patients, Pooja, you can be involved, would you suggest these patients for PRK or would you stick to SMILE?
Ma'am, based on the refractive error, we'll choose either between trans-PRK or a SMILE, but with an extra procedure, which is a flash cross-linking.
Yeah.
So always one of it.
But PRK, we do understand that there is some amount of inflammation which happens in the healing process. In fact, the people would say that you don't have to cross-link these eyes at all. So why not in those suspicious cases opt for a PRK? If you can counsel the patient that there's going to be initial discomfort, then do the SMILE extra. Your thoughts?
Agree with you.
Yes.
Yes.
You can ask. Yeah. Any other questions from the audience? This is the best time to ask and we could all clarify together.
See, my question is, anyone who can afford an excimer or a femto can afford a biomechanics tool.
Yeah.
It is yet not caught on and yet not hot. So now the question here to Pooja is, how many of her patients, which they have analyzed everything, okay, and it's passed on biomechanics and still developed an ectasia?
Actually, before Pooja adds, Pooja, you can tell, none of our extra patients have developed ectasia. Not that we took on frank ectasia cases, these were suspect cases. So neither was it, there was a haze, nor was it impacting refractive error, and we've been doing extra for more than 10 years now. So I do not see why we should shun it, because we know that cross-linking is definitely contributing this to strength, and half fluent seems to make sense.
So I would say that biomechanics for us helps a lot, because for all our patients we do biomechanics, and based on topography and biomechanics we choose which would be the ideal practice. Whenever we have gone for SMILE extra or a trans PRK looking at biomechanics, we have never gone wrong. Where we have all probably gone wrong is, like Rajesh sir said very nicely, is qualitative analysis of topography. Very long back, you know, your corneal thickness used to be 580s with skewing, but biomechanics used to be very good. We have done LASIK for those cases, and that's when we have developed ectasias. But with biomechanics help, choosing a SMILE extra or PRK, we have never gone wrong. So I think biomechanics is there to stay. I just believe that probably we have to use it in the right way. So. Off lately, since past 6 months, our extra patients have become almost 25% in the practice. I'll tell you why, because last 10 years, we've not had any case, ma'am said, of SMILE extra developing an ectasia. We have had a case of SMILE or LASIK developing ectasia, but not any case of extra. So extra is always a good thing, and we always tell patients, see, it's not that you need it, but we are doing it as a precautionary procedure, so don't get worried about it. So we've never gone wrong with extra, at least at this point of time.
At least the regression part of it has also stabilized.
Regressions are very less with SMILE.
But SMILE extra, there is one query which maybe Rajesh would bring up. We are eating it's like a transepithelial PRK. So then that way you can question it. So I strongly believe that if cross-linking has a role, it's PRK extra more than SMILE extra.
One thing that I would like to highlight is that if you look at the axial maps on a pentacam, they're not as good as what you see in a Placido-based topographer.
Yes.
So if you want to look at a qualitative aspect of a topography map, you have to fall back. Like TMS is great. I've started with TMS1, gone up to TMS4, and we can pick up many more cases which are abnormal than all these various indices that you use. In fact, in some of the presentations, what you show cases as normal topography, showing abnormal other parameters. In the qualitative map, that's abnormal. Even when I look at your map, I can already see the asymmetric bow tie and slight skewing. But so that's why you cannot give away topography as saying that, only tomography. Unless your tomography has a good Placido-based imaging system and you don't have a qualitative good imaging of the axial map, I think that is something that people are forgetting, that you really need to look at the qualitative aspect of the topography as well. And epithelial mapping is again something that masks. So very in early cases, those are the two things that I would lay very much importance on. I want to see the good qualitative map, axial map, and I want to look at a good epithelial map. Because in epithelial map, the slight thinning of the epithelium at the apex and a surrounding thickening, that is something that will pick up an abnormality much earlier than any of the biomechanical indices.
Absolutely. So I think the take home is basically for anyone who would like to have refractive surgical practice, the essential tools that you should have is a nice Placido with tomography, and if you have access to OCT nowadays, everybody has OCTs and segment practice. If you can add the tool of epithelial mapping, that should resolve more than 99% of your issues.
Can I make a brief comment here?
Yes, brief.
So
It's
very brief.
9:40,
I would be
yeah.
very brief. So one thing is we have to understand post-LASIK ectasia is multifactorial. Incidence is very low.
Very less.
So whatever we say we have done this thing has worked or something, that's related to incidence is very low. Also, it's not always the pre-op factor. We know that from Demel Gatinel study that the post-op, when patients have indirect eye rubbing, direct eye rubbing, they are the main culprit. So irrespective whatever we do, if we do not take care of them, we still can end up ectasia.
Yes.
So it's not
Yes.
just one particular
Yes,
thing.
yes.
Point
Even
very well taken.
pregnancy.